It's the week of Christmas, and a beautiful one at that. And this is Business Morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagu. Last week was a busy one in the world of business, and there were a lot of stories out there that has to do with the economy. The inflation numbers for November came out indicating a continuous rise on inflation, particularly food inflation. Inflation number year on year is currently at 14.89% and most likely will cross 15% threshold by December. Food inflation is as high as 18.30%. Now, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, non-performing loans in the Nigerian banking sector declined by 42.4 billion naira in 3 months. Nigeria's capital importation as of third quarter 2020 stood at $1.46 billion, increasing by 12.86% from second quarter of 2020, and it declined by 74.03% compared to third quarter of 2019. Again, the Senate passed the Finance Bill 2020. The bill seeks to amend 12 acts, which include the Capital Gains Tax Act, Companies Income Tax Act, Personal Income Tax Act, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, and so on. There are about 12 of them. And then the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee shared a total of 601.1 billion naira to the federal, state, and local governments, and of course the agencies. Also, the federal government finally reopened the borders last week, but 4 of them with Benin and Niger, and promised to reopen the other border points at the end of December. Good news, isn't it? And finally, the World Bank approved Nigeria's request for a $1.5 billion loan as budget support and to help cushion the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the country's revenue. Here is what the World Bank said. Nigeria is at a critical point, and that's the reason for the approval of the loan. The statement partly reads, with a sharp fall in oil prices as a result of COVID-19, the economy is projected to contract by over 4% in 2020, plunging the country into its deepest recession since the 1980s. Government revenues could fall by more than $15 billion this year, and the crisis will push an additional 5 million Nigerians into poverty in 2020. Well, I didn't say this, the World Bank did. Now let's bring in an economic policy analyst and the CEO of Espera Global Corporation, Dr. Glenn Prince Abi. Thank you very much, Dr. Abi, for joining us on the program. It's always a pleasure having you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Now, here is what we need to know about this $1.5 billion facility to Nigeria. The World Bank delayed its approval because of concerns over some critical reforms, as the bank believes that Nigeria has not shown enough commitment towards realizing them. And some of these key reforms include the flexibility and unification of the exchange rate, removal of fuel subsidy, and an increase in electricity tariffs. So, are we on the right path now?
Well, in terms of reforms, I think there's a whole lot that our country has to make, in order to, to make us properly prepared to stimulate the economy. Essentially, certain components of the reforms have been mentioned, but there are still a whole lot of activities, a whole lot of areas where we need to improve the capacity of the economy to actually grow in terms of stimulation, because at the point where we are, because the World Bank loan is actually meant to stimulate the economy, the loan is split into 2 principal components. The Nigeria Cares aspect, which has to do with COVID-19 action, economic stimulus recovery program for results, and then the aspect that talks about the state's fiscal accountability and sustainability program for results. So under these two components of the loan, standing at $750 million, the first, and then the second $750 million. So if we look at, for instance, the aspect of the federal government, which has to do with the Nigeria Cares aspect of post-COVID-19 action recovery program for recovery, for results. We're looking at economic stimulating programs. So I will look at that. I'll look at that in terms of our preparedness to utilize effectively the loan. We'll be examining that, okay? And then also we'll look at the aspect of the states, the Nigerian states, the fiscal accountability, sustainability program, where the state's capacity for transparency, the state's capacity for IGR generation, will also be examining that, okay? So as we go on in the discussion, I will shed light on that and see what really needs to be done at the federal level in terms of full preparedness and capacity to very effectively utilize the loan, and also the state level in terms of the state's readiness, state's level of readiness also to utilize the loan in a way that is particularly economic stimulating, that actually can achieve the result. Because first of all, we have to remember also that World Bank's program is based on what is called the country partnership framework, which is drawn to cover a 4-year program, 2021 to 2024. So under the 4-year program, under the country partnership framework, the World Bank looks at what can, how the bank can be, leveraged to stimulate economic growth in a way that is sustainable, in a way that's inclusive. So we'll look at what the Nigerian government needs to do to fulfill this aspect of the strategy of the country partnership program. So these are areas that I think we can explore further as we discuss. Thank you.
Sure. Now, talking about utilization, yes, borrowing, they say, is not bad. But what is important is what you use the borrowed money to do. Yes, World Bank says the crisis will push an additional 5 million Nigerians into poverty by the end of this year. Now, you talked about, sharing what you think the state, the federal, and the local government can actually do in this regard. So are you worried about how these borrowed monies can be utilized? So what's your suggestions? How do you think the state governments, the federal government, the local governments can actually, and there has to be a synergy in doing this?
All right, I may not use the word worry, because worry actually signifies a level of pessimism. But let me rather talk about my recommendations, what I think should be done. Okay, because under the Nigeria Cares program of the COVID-19 action, response, and economic growth stimulation program for results of the loan, which is $750 million, I want to, for the federal government to look at aspects, because under that there are 4 components. There is the FADAMA program, which is meant to be further funded. But I observed that, the state governors all insisted that, even state governors in the South insisted that the FADAMA program should cover them. But I think that is a bit of an aberration, because the FADAMA program is a strategy designed to stimulate irrigation, particularly in areas of the country, in particular, northern part of the country, where access to water is a bit of a challenge. So the FADAMA is targeted at a lot of irrigation. So the governors all insisted, in the South, all insisted that, they should all be included in FADAMA program under this loan and all that. Well, one part of the problem we have in Nigeria is that there's always some level of political consideration, the quota mentality that we have. So in terms of strategy, I think spreading the loan to cover FADAMA also for the southern states, southern states across the country, I think it's a bit of an aberration. But anyway, then we look at the aspect of the conditional cash transfer. this is one of the elements that are covered, for inclusive economic, inclusive for social spending, okay? And then the federal government, of course, we know, has carried out this conditional cash transfer for about 5 years. I want to look at a situation where under this loan and even under other programs, it can move from the core tactical to practical strategy of leveraging the relationship, the database, the framework that has been established for the most vulnerable and the poorest of our communities to start to be active participants in the economy. So I expect that there should be a strategy that now goes beyond just giving them 5,000 naira cash to enabling them to be active contributors to the economy. So it means that there has to be practical steps to engage advisors, community advisors and consultants who can go down there, start to interact with them in a way that enables them to start to do business, no matter the level of micro-involvement that they are involved in. So that will stimulate more of, that would achieve the inclusive economic growth that we're talking about at their level, leveraging the conditional cash transfer as an existing framework. There are other aspects, for instance, community development is also there, town halls and markets and all that, and then health institutions. Now, regarding community development, I would say that the aspect of town halls may not actually be a crucial priority, because it is, while it's a good and important infrastructure in the community, at the community level town halls, but in terms of urgency, in terms of, okay, you took a loan, just, and part of it is to build town halls, I think that that the thinking there is a bit weak. We can look more rather at involving communities in businesses and all that, because the fundamental strategy of the country partnership program, or the country partnership framework of the World Bank, is actually stimulating economic growth and the inclusiveness and all that. So all aspects of economic growth enhancing activities, what should be the core focus. So more plans need to be carried out, even before we start to spend the money in the system. We have to just look at that as well. And then, of course, for the state governments, they need to also do that, because there is $750 million also shared among them across the board at the state government level. So they have to see how actual economic activities can be boosted with that, rather than using it to fund a recurrent expenditure and things like that. And now that brings me to the aspect of Nigeria's challenge in terms of what we need to do vis-a-vis fiscal consolidation. Now, over time and space, the bilateral agencies, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, have always advanced that fiscal consolidation programs, fiscal consolidation strategies must focus on revenue-generating capacity of governments, of developing economies. For me, what I observe here is that our revenue generation is the principal drawback in our fiscal consolidation. We are weak in the area of revenue generation, and then we are also weak in the area of managing soaring recurrent expenditure. Now, we are borrowing, excellent idea, but then we are borrowing also against a challenge where we have about $55 billion shortfall in our revenue. That's through oil and all that. $55 billion, 77%. Shortfall in our revenue generation, particularly from crude oil. So it means also that to make sense of this, to make sense of the activities that we are carrying out, it means that we have to strongly visit our recurrent expenditure framework. I want to see the federal government coming up with recurrent expenditure containment strategies that can be tested, that can be put through a litmus test to see whether there's clear discipline. And I fear that has not been done. I fear, too, that might not be done because of political expediency, because much of our recurrent expenditure activities are geared towards managing the political system and geared towards satisfying political priorities and imperatives rather than core economic priorities. For instance, if we go through the news, go through all the headings of the newspapers, either online on hard copy and all that, you discover that 75 to 85% of news items are purely political. We don't discuss economy. We're in a very critical situation as a country, and then we're not discussing the economy. We have the opposition, whose statements are always political. I would expect a more involved set of activities by the opposition where they come up with strategies, core strategies in terms of economy and all that, rather than just commentary about, oh, this is not done, this is not good, and things like that. There has to be more involvement in economic revitalization across the board by the federal government, by the state government, and also at the local government level. State governors should start to set very tough agendas for local government management executives, the chairman and their councillors, to come up with strategies for core economic growth in the local government areas. In that way, they'll be able to also fulfill their IGR element, the IGR component of the state fiscal sustainability transparency program for results, which they're borrowing, which the money is being borrowed for them for. So in that way, we can actually improve our response system to activate, stimulate the economy at a critical moment such as we're in.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Abi, we really don't have much time now, but, you know, now we're beginning to see, it seems we're beginning to have what we will call a second wave of this coronavirus. And we can see even in the Western world, there's been some kind of lockdown, particularly in the UK. Yes, vaccine is in the horizon, but then, I don't know, are we prepared? What should we be doing now to avert yet another lockdown and to ensure that we actually get out of this present recession?
Well, at the beginning of the virus outbreak, sometime in the first quarter of the year, we had, you and I, we had a couple of interactions on this in this very studio on this, and had indicated that you asked a question whether, at that time, whether the reactions to the coronavirus outbreak was disproportionate. And I strongly argue that this was actually disproportionate, grossly disproportionate. And it's because of the disproportionate nature of reaction and response to the outbreak of the pandemic that the world's economy is in this state now. So I think that an overconsciousness and therefore a lockdown of economic activities, a consciousness of the pandemic, and a complete lockdown of economic activities does not actually, result in any reasonable level of protection of our economy. So we should look at how we can maintain all the protocols that are required, while at the same time allowing the economy to move on, social activities, economic activities to move on. Because if we do carry out that kind of lockdown in Nigeria, for instance, is going to worsen things, because we have seen the effect of it. Now, of course, in Europe, lockdowns are occurring, full lockdowns are occurring and all that. And we can also imagine the implication of that on the Nigerian economy, because automatically it means that our oil production, oil exports will be low, because the industrial activities in the countries that import from us are what enable our crude oil prices our crude oil revenues to keep flowing in. So all of these are big threats. So I would say, very, very briefly, that the main thing that we need to do as a country is actually visiting economic activities, production activities. It is only production activities that are accelerated, production activities that are made more robust, production activities that actually can spread to all strata of society in a very strategic a measurable way that can actually prevent us from being so, susceptible to such economic shocks as what we are facing now. So there has to be more strategy by the federal government in terms of seeing how production activities, economic activities can be stimulated across the board. And the state governors also should fold their sleeves and see how production activities, of course, can be very much stimulated. Every activity, every spending by government, federal, state, should look at what economic activities this spending generate for us. So every spending should be tied to that. And then again, there must be clear transparency in terms of expenditure management, recurrent expenditure. If we have not visited recurrent expenditure, no dime, for instance, no dime has been reduced in our recurrent expenditure, even though we are facing very serious challenges. We are entering a recession and things like that. So there must be clear evidence of readiness through managing the ever-rising spiraling recurrent expenditure. So there must be the political readiness, the political will to contain recurrent expenditure.
All right.
That's to balance what we're doing by way of fiscal consolidation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prince Abi. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Well, I'm not sure if I'll see you before Christmas, but I hope to talk to you before Christmas, and I wish you and your family a Merry Christmas. Be well, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Thank you very much. I wish you the very same thing. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the new year, too, if we don't get to see again in the studio. Thank you.
We will see. Right. And after over a year, Nigeria reopens its borders. Nasima shares its perspective on this next.